But first to what happened in Pakistan today. After 9 months under house arrest, Hafiz Saeed, the mastermind of the 2008 Mumbai terror attacks, will walk free this week, possibly tomorrow. Evidently, Pakistan completely surrendered to terror. Here's what happened in court today.
Days after this shower of flowers, it's time for celebrations in terror camps in Pakistan. On Wednesday, the charade of a hearing at the Lahore High Court finally ended. The court ordered the release of UN and US designated terrorist Hafiz Saeed. The Pakistan government's meek defense to keep him under house arrest cut no ice, according to Saeed's lawyer A.K. Dogar. The review board has not found any satisfactory evidence for Hafiz Saeed, so it has instructed the government to release him henceforth. The Pakistan government pleaded that failing to extend Saeed's detention could lead to international sanctions. But this clearly was a half-hearted attempt aimed at placating the US, which announced a $10 million bounty on his head and has been questioning Islamabad's intent to take on terror. In line with what Indian analysts had feared, the Pakistani government could not build up a single case to keep him under detention.
मैं इन जजों का भी शुक्रिया अदा करता हूं। लाहौर हाई कोर्ट के तमाम वकला ने बहुत भरपूर मेरा साथ दिया और हर मौके पर वो साथ खड़े हुए, तो मैं उनका भी शुक्रिया अदा करता हूं। अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह पाकिस्तान में ये इसकी मैं समझता हूं ये पाकिस्तान की आज़ादी की फतह है।
The groundwork for Saeed's freedom was in fact being laid for many weeks. In August, the government did not extend the notification for his detention under the Anti-Terrorism Act. It withdrew an application before the Federal Review Board for extension of his house arrest and put him under house arrest for an additional 2 months under the Punjab Maintenance of Public Order Act. Analysts believe the timing is crucial. It comes at a time when Pakistan's proxy war in Kashmir is facing the heat. Terrorists in the valley are on the run and the Pakistani military is looking to mainstream radical elements ahead of the 2018 elections. Thus, when Saeed walks out a free man in Pakistan this week, it's not just the jihadists who will be celebrating. Bureau Report, WION.
Pakistan has given India a big jolt ahead of the 26/11 anniversary by this decision. By releasing the man India calls the mastermind of the terror attacks that killed at least 160 people. The message is clear. Do not expect justice from Terroristan.
The night India will never forget. The night Mumbai was besieged. The night India witnessed terror. 26 November 2008. The night of terror was masterminded by this man, now set to walk free. Despite concrete evidence handed over by India in multiple dossiers.
सीमा पार से आतंकवादियों को गौरवान्वित करने और भारत के एक अखंड भाग में हिंसा फैलाने के इन निंदनीय प्रयासों से भी ज्यादा खतरनाक बात यह है कि इन प्रयासों को पाकिस्तान एक नामी आतंकवादी हाफिज सईद और यूएन द्वारा प्रतिबंधित अनेक आतंकवादियों के साथ मिलकर खुद अंजाम दे रहा है।
The proof that India gave against Hafiz Saeed is called Grade 1 evidence and included documentary proof like emails from LET operative Sajid Majid to David Headley, proof of Hafiz Saeed's meets with David Headley, evidence that Saeed monitored Headley's progress on Mumbai recce, and the confessional statement of Ajmal Kasab, the terrorist who was caught alive during the 26/11 siege. Evidence that Saeed spoke to each 26/11 terrorist and proof of his sermons on the fruits of martyrdom. Despite these concrete evidence India provided, Pakistan says there isn't enough to nail the 26/11 plotter. Despite the on-camera statement of terrorist Ajmal Kasab, Pakistan says there isn't enough evidence. Despite the $10 million American bounty on him, Pakistan says there isn't enough evidence to nail the 26/11 plotter. Pakistan will allow the global terrorist to walk free. Bureau Report, WION.
Joining us this evening, Taha Siddiqui, WION's Islamabad Bureau Chief, Leela Punappa, former Deputy National Security Advisor with us from New Delhi. Ray Locker, National Security Editor at USA Today, with us from Washington. Shahzeb Jilani, a senior journalist, with us from Karachi this evening. Good evening to everyone. Taha, was this decision on expected lines, the release of Hafiz Saeed?
Well, it had been long coming, from what I understand. Basically, what the courts had repeatedly asked the government officials to act seriously in this matter, and we'd seen that no evidence was submitted by them, despite repeated, questioning by the courts. And eventually, the courts had said and hinted towards this particular outcome, saying that if the government is not cooperating, and it was not just the government, basically the prosecution that was carrying out the case against Hafiz Saeed, that did not bring in the evidence, bring in the proof that it had to bring in, and because of which the courts then eventually had no option, from what we understand, but to let him go. But even then, I mean, before, the courts did give some sort of leeway and tried to delay it as much as possible, because earlier also there were a lot of reprimanding from the courts of government officials because of the lack of evidence or documentary evidence. But despite that, we saw that, and today eventually the review board that had given an extension earlier on then decided in favor of Hafiz Saeed. So he will be released on 24th of November now.
Leela Punappa, India, it seems, has tried everything in this case, giving evidence and urging the world community to put pressure on Pakistan to act. Nothing has worked. It's been 9 years. Is it now time for unilateral action, a surgical strike, if you may?
Well, the time for unilateral action was shortly after the attacks themselves took place, but it didn't happen. Now that this whole thing has virtually been trivialized through a legal process, I think we have to recognize that this is going to play on and on and on. Yes, we've waited 9 years. We might wait another 9 years and justice might still be forthcoming, as it is in many other cases of proven cases of Pakistan terrorism acts in India. We've had Pathankot thereafter, we've had Uri, Gurdaspur, and so on. So the list goes on and on and on. We have to recognize that there are certain realities in Pakistan. In fact, just a year ago, slightly over a year ago, when Mr. Nawaz Sharif was still the Prime Minister, he held this famously documented meeting, which journalist Cyril Almeida wrote about in The Dawn, where the then Foreign Secretary projected to the political and the military leadership that Pakistan's ongoing support of terrorism was going to result in Pakistan's isolation. This was mid-October 2016, as I recall. Today, Mr. Sharif is no longer the Prime Minister, and as always in Pakistan, the military strategy prevails. So we should not be surprised by this development, and I think the action that is required with regard to countering terrorism, represented by Hafiz Saeed and many, many others like him and under his leadership, it's something that India really has to recognize, it has to deal with on its own. You might get international support through resolutions and such like, but action will have to be by India itself.
And what would that entail when we say we have to take action? Because this is something that we've discussed in detail here on this channel, on this show, that you can only depend on the rest of the world to a certain extent. Beyond that, you have to deal with what is essentially your own problem. What does that entail? And so I come back to the question, if America could strike, and I know the dynamics are different, do something in Abbottabad, is India not ready? Is India not capable? Does India not want to? What is the problem? What is it that we're not doing?
Well, I don't think these are subjects to discuss on TV channels.
Okay. All right, I'll take that. Ray Locker, we're waiting for a State Department briefing later today. What reaction can be expected from Washington? Another reprimand followed by no action?
That has been the pattern so far, Palki. I mean, we want Pakistan to do more than they're doing. They haven't done that. Recently, President Trump said Pakistan is the one country that's come out and really shown respect for the United States. That doesn't seem like that today. I mean, Pakistan has always broken the United States' heart in terms of, dealing with terrorism. We want them to do more. They make one step forward, two steps back. It shows again that they don't really have that much interest in dealing with the problem. I mean, I think the evidence that I've seen is pretty convincing. It shows Hafiz Saeed was the mastermind of the Mumbai attacks. And I think the Indian evidence is pretty compelling. Obviously, the Pakistani justice system works in weird ways, and has again this time.
Shehzab Jilani, India is very upset, and you would understand and appreciate why. But what does this decision mean for Pakistan? This is a man who has a $10 million bounty on his head. This is a man who, it has been proven beyond doubt, masterminded the worst terror attack on Indian soil, and he's showered with rose petals, and he's allowed to walk free. If there was any credibility in the Pakistani judicial system, would you say they've done away with it today?
You know, in Pakistan, this is not even news. It is not even being discussed on primetime TV. And I can understand, you know, for India, it is a really big deal. But here in Pakistan, to a military mind, Hafiz Saeed is a patriot. He has furthered Pakistan's geostrategic interest by carrying out attacks in India. Obviously, not everybody agrees. There are people who believe that he's a liability. And this is something that Pakistan's foreign minister said in Washington just last September. At a think tank when he was asked pointedly about Lashkar-e-Taiba and Hafiz Saeed, and he said, look, they are a liability. We have to deal with them, but it's not easy. What he was saying is there's an army which has used Hafiz Saeed for its purpose. Hafiz Saeed, nobody expected him to be put on trial. Well on Pakistan's part to push Hafiz Saeed. Everybody knows in the region the games that we've been playing with each other. So no surprise at all that he's been allowed to go free. I think what's interesting is in the last, I think, few weeks from Washington, the U.S. Congress has de-linked Haqqani from Lashkar-e-Taiba. I think that was quite interesting. The American priority is the Haqqani network in Afghanistan. And they are willing to cut some slack to Pakistan when it comes to Lashkar-e-Taiba, and that's why in the legislation, Lashkar-e-Taiba has not been mentioned. So, you know, you can say that this has probably emboldened Pakistan, and that is why, you know, after about 9 months or so of detention, the house arrest, he's been allowed to set free.
Ray, this is an issue that we highlighted, the hypocrisy, the selective war on terror being waged by America. Do you think this decision is going to prompt a rethink in Washington as to why action against Lashkar-e-Taiba was dropped as a precondition for Pakistan?
Well, I think it's constantly going on here. There's a reevaluation of decisions made in terms of war on terror. You have a country like India with 1.3 billion people versus a country like Afghanistan, who's so much smaller and less consequential. And yet we're making decisions to cut deals with Pakistan to help out in Afghanistan, whereas we have this huge trading partner in India that has the same kind of terrorism problems. It's going to be a problem for the United States in terms of how it reconciles that. And in some cases, it doesn't seem to make sense.
Taha, what are you picking up from your sources? Has this case been diluted deliberately to ensure Hafiz Saeed's release, and why now?
Well, you know, I was talking to some sources on ground in Lahore. The word right now is that the government is sort of scrambling to find some way to continue for this detention, and that's what they're trying to do. Now, this is the civilian side of the government, but definitely we're seeing that you know, the very fact that he has been allowed to go free in less than 24 hours, his security detail will be removed. The police will go away from his house where he is currently under house arrest. Basically, you know, it seems like there is a difference of opinion here. And this comes from the fact that, you know, just a few months ago, it was the first time that Milli Muslim League, which is basically the political wing of Jamaat ad-Dawa, that came into politics, and there has been this news report, and it was widely reported here in other local media also, from a military general, a former military general who had just recently retired, about a plan of the Pakistani military establishment to mainstream these militant groups, including Jamaat ad-Dawa, and we then saw Milli Muslim League. So elections coming up, Milli Muslim League being formed just a few months ago, this is all a part of that play, and it also plays into the civil-military imbalances that we're seeing today in the country, in the sense that, Nawaz Sharif's party, they have a good voter base in Lahore, they have a good voter base amongst the Jamaat-ud-Dawa sort of supporters, and that will be dented by bringing Hafiz Saeed out, glorifying him, giving more support to Milli Muslim League in the coming days as elections come nearer.
Indeed. Leela Punappa, I know you want to make a point. I'll just come to you. But first, I want to play out for our viewers a sound bite that shows how this has been a charade from the word go. He was put under house arrest to evade Pakistan's name being included in that list, the travel ban list by the Americans. For months, this case dragged on in court. We've heard from the likes of Khwaja Asif, the foreign minister of Pakistan, who talked about the culture of terrorism in Pakistan, saying the likes of Hafiz Saeed are a liability. Listen into what he said just a few weeks back.
हमारी जो ethos है उसमें embedded है for last 40 years. At least 40 साल से ये हमारा जो कल्चर है या हमारा जो जिंदगी का हिस्सा है, मैं ethos का लफ्ज़ इस्तेमाल करता हूँ, मुझे कोई उसका ट्रांसलेशन नहीं मिल रही सही उसकी, embedded है उसमें. अगर आप समझते हैं कि 40 साल का ये जो चीज़ जो है, जो आपके बदन में, आपकी कौम के, आपके वतन के बदन के अंदर जो चीज़ जो है एम्बेडेड है, उसको आप 2 साल में या 1.5 साल में निकाल लेंगे, तो ये एक गलतफहमी आप रख सकते हैं, मुझे ये गलतफहमी नहीं है. आपने एक पूरा कल्चर चेंज करना है जो आपने क्रिएट किया. उस
Terrorism is in our culture, in our ethos, says the foreign minister of Pakistan, in the same breath also saying the likes of Hafiz Saeed are a liability. Leela Punappa, it's the old question when it comes to Pakistan. Who do you believe, who's calling the shots? The civilian government says one thing, but we know that the military has orchestrated his release.
No, it's a question not of who you believe, but really of what you see and what you have seen for the past 7 decades in terms of the existence of the Pakistani state. You've got to separate the realities of Pakistan from the illusions. So the fact that at one point President Trump says Pakistan is cooperating doesn't mean a thing, because there is enough documentation within the United States in public and in private to show the games that they have played. So Pakistan has really not been the ally that the US hoped it would be. But coming back to the present case, it's very interesting. According to the press reports that I've seen, the Lahore High Court has given the Pakistan government a way out, which it might well pick up for cosmetic reasons, to say that his detention could continue, or that his detention would end if there were no other case brought against him. In other words, if the Pakistan government were to bring a case against Hafiz Saeed, then the detention could continue. And as your Pakistan panelist said, that the Pakistan establishment is scrambling right now to try to see how they can continue the detention. So let's not be surprised if a fresh case is brought up tomorrow. But let us also recognize that the charade that you spoke about, starting from January this year in terms of the house arrest, really goes back much further. If you track the action with regard to Hafiz Saeed shortly after the Mumbai attacks, he was put under house arrest in December 2008. He was released shortly thereafter. And the judges on the case have kept changing. So without a doubt, there has clearly been intimidation. Some of them have recused themselves and so on. And we will see more of this. Let's be prepared for rallies in Pakistan and, of course, a continued policy of state support of terrorism driven by the deep state and the establishment in Pakistan.
Shahzeb Jilani, what is your reading of this? Is the establishment really paving the way for his full-fledged entry into politics?
They have been talking about this for a while. And if you look at the election after the former Prime Minister was kicked out and there was a by-election, the political wing of Hafiz Saeed did quite well. They got 4.6% votes, even though it had just been kind of formed. And within weeks, it garnered so much support. And who was it targeting? it was targeting Nawaz Sharif and his party. Why? Because Nawaz Sharif was elected 4 years ago on the promise that he wants to improve relations with neighbors like India and Afghanistan. That's something that obviously does not go well with our army. So they were, over the last few years, there was a campaign to destabilize him, and eventually they got him out. And they want his party to be hounded by the very same elements that the army has used against India for many years now.
Ray Locker, the release is going to almost coincide with the 9th anniversary of the 26/11 terror attacks, and many have pointed out that this is a provocation, that Pakistan is essentially cocking a snook at India. Would you say this is a provocation for the US as well, which has long back, which banned the organizations led by Hafiz Saeed, which announced a bounty on his head, and yet, despite all the billions that you pour into Pakistan to fight terrorist organizations, the establishment continues to shield and promote terrorists like him?
I don't know how you can look at it any other way. Obviously, his release is kind of a slap in the face to what the United States has been trying to do there for years. I know that there are complicated reasons for why things happen the way they do in Pakistan, and most of our foreign policy specialists realize that. Nevertheless, I mean, that was such a high-profile attack that killed Americans as well as Indians, and now you have the person responsible being let out of house arrest, probably to go back into politics openly. I don't know how you look at that as anything other than a major setback.
Indeed. I'm going to thank you all. Taha Siddiqui, Leela Ponappa, Ray Locker and Shahzeb Jilani. Thank you very much. And as Leela said, that we may have to, who knows, wait for another 9 years before we see any action against this man. He has a $10 million bounty on his head and the designation of global terrorist, and is expected to walk free shortly. The decision to let him go ahead of the traditional weekly prayers is no coincidence. It is deliberate. Expect Hafiz Saeed to breathe fire and fury against India from a jihadi pulpit just before the 9th anniversary of the Mumbai terror attacks. It can also be read as a signal from the Pakistani deep state that international pressure notwithstanding, and whether it is Hafiz Saeed or some other equally famous or notorious terrorists, they will do what they want to do. There will be no let up in the terror war against India, or for that matter, the proxy war Pakistan is waging in Afghanistan. That any concession in terms of restricting the activities of terrorists or terror groups is purely tactical, purely short term. How else does one read the number of times Hafiz Saeed has been detained and released? He was first detained in December 2001 after the attacks on India's parliament. In March 2002, he was a free man. He was rearrested in May, released in October. In August 2006, he was detained after the Mumbai train bombings, only to be set free some days later. Rearrested, set free again in October. In December 2008, he was detained and released in July 2009. In September the same year, he was detained and set free in October. In most, if not all of these cases, his detention was in response to Pakistan's civilian government feeling the international diplomatic heat over terrorist acts in India, or because of pressure from the United States. His release is of equal import. The Lashkar-e-Toiba is a favored child of the Pakistani military intelligence deep state. It is focused on Kashmir, not on Afghanistan or the US. At a time when the terrorist flame in Kashmir Valley is flickering, Saeed's release is expected to revive flagging jihadi morale. Expect terrorist infiltration across the line of control to increase. The release of Hafiz Saeed sends another signal. While the US has designated North Korea as a state sponsor of terrorism on rather thin evidence, I'm sorry, it has refused to do so in the case of Pakistan. Washington, we know, has put a price on Saeed's head but is not taking action. Word is Lashkar-e-Toiba has been useful in helping the Pakistani government capture or kill all Al-Qaeda operatives. Abu Zubaydah, the Saudi national and rumored associate of Osama bin Laden, was arrested by the Pakistani police in 2002. They were reportedly acting on a tip-off from the Lashkar-e-Toiba. Zubaydah was handed over to the US and remains a prisoner in Guantanamo Bay.